Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. There's nothing worse than violent, alcoholic neighbors. Let's see what our OP did to them. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Call the cops for you? Absolutely. Several years ago, we had some new neighbors move in, a man and a woman renting, and they weren't exactly salt of the earth folks. There were obvious signs of alcohol abuse, playing music so loud that our windows rattled in our house next door, mean dogs that escaped all the time, people over all the time, and parking in the road. You know the type. We tried to be polite, but steered clear of them when possible. It was a crappy situation, made worse only by the fact that the college kids that used to live there had moved out after years of neighborly bliss. Their parents actually still owned the house, and I'd already made a couple of calls to them about the disturbances. I guess it must have been about a year after they moved in when I was driving home from work and headed down our street in a direction where I was passing in front of their house. It was almost dark out, and this was a small residential street with light traffic, and the speed limit was maybe 25 or 30. The man of the house was out in the street, stumbling around, yelling, flailing his hands, blocking cars as they were trying to get by. Obviously, he was wasted. He kept screaming for somebody to call the cops. I managed to eke by him and park in my driveway. I watched for about 15 minutes as he continued this little show. I wanted to watch for any evidence that he was in any sort of jeopardy other than being in the street. So I looked at my wife and said, you know what, he wants the cops, I'm going to oblige. I picked up the phone and dialed 911 and told them there was a man in the street blocking traffic and asking for someone to call the police. About 5 minutes later, the city's finest roll up in 2 squad cars. We went out and sat on our front porch and watched them try to get this dude into the back seat for 20 minutes, and ultimately he was hogtied, then thrown in on his stomach by the time they were done. I guess he didn't want the cops after all. We never saw him again, but a couple weeks later, there was a new man of the house that had moved in. We sold and moved a few months after that, but never saw that first guy again, so I have no idea what happened. I can only presume he had outstanding warrants and was locked up. And our next story. Steal my design and get all the credit? Enjoy getting kicked off? So my friend over in Korea studies fashion design. She sometimes sends me over the sketches of her designs, and they all look amazing. Then again, I'm not into fashion. She's particularly interested in designing handbags and purses. She told me a story about how she shut down one of the most entitled, self-centered, lazy students on campus. Cast: Grace, our main character girl; Jane, the evil one; Professor, the instructor of the course. Story: At first, Grace and Jane got along just fine. They were both interested in similar stuff and quickly became BFFs. Grace decided to show Jane her sketches and designs for handbags and purses, and Jane was so impressed by it because the sketches were in incredible detail, including all the patterns and sew lines coupled with figurative measurements. Even Professor was impressed by it, and it was no surprise that Grace got a high mark on their first major exam. Jane didn't do so well and practically followed Grace everywhere to get pointers on how to do better. So Grace decided to help her out. Unfortunately, Jane turned out to be one of the most entitled, lazy, and selfish people that Grace has ever met. Things that Jane did to piss Grace off included, but not limited to, not paying attention, being late to their study session, never showed appreciation, didn't pay for coffee or snacks, complaining annoyingly about how hard it was to draw something. Grace pretty much gave up on her after a week, refusing to meet Jane outside of her class. Time went by, and for their midterm, everyone in class had to do a presentation on the stuff they designed. When it was Jane's turn, Grace was shocked to see Jane had stolen one of her designs. Thankfully, Grace had multiple designs going on, so there were no conflicts when it was her turn to present. But she was seething with rage. Grace had a meeting with the professor afterwards, and the professor knew what was going on, but couldn't really do anything with Jane because it turns out she was the daughter of the chairman, or one of the major investors. Grace said she couldn't recall. The chairman apparently blackmailed the professor into giving Jane the best grades. The revenge. Professor did, however, help Grace devise a plan to humiliate and expose Jane. For the finals, the professor announced to the class that they'd do another presentation, but it would be 3 designs, and advised they had to bring their A-games because professionals from industries would be grading their work, and the head of the department and the chairman would be there as well. So, you know how Grace had a bunch of sketches for the class? Well, Grace had a separate sketchbook that had designs from major brands. MK, Coach, you name it. She never used these directly for class assignments, but rather as inspirations for her designs. Grace pretended to be all friendly with Jane again and brought the other sketchbook to their meetings, still putting up with all the problems mentioned above. Grace secretly worked tirelessly on her new design and did her best to keep it a secret from Jane. So the day of the final presentation arrives, and Grace and Professor are grinning because they know what's about to happen. Grace went first, and she got a ton of praise from the judges. After a few more presentations, the last one to go was Jane. Jane's presentation turned out to be another copycat, copying designs of not 1, not 2, but 3 different companies. After the presentation, this was how it all went down, at least according to Grace. Judge 1. So you're saying you designed all these by yourself, right? Jane. That's right. Judge 1. And you swear that it was really your design and didn't copy off anything else, right? Jane. I swear. Judge 1. You are aware your designs are from 3 brands. Jane. Huh? Judge 1. Are you aware that these are on market right now and some of the most popular designs? Jane. Wait, hold on. Judge 2. Yeah, I was going to bring this up. If you'd worked for any brands, you would have probably been fired or, worst case, sued. Jane. But, Judge 2. Please, I'm not done yet. Did you honestly think this would work? We, the judges, have been in the industry for over 10 years. We know a copycat when we see it. Jane. But these aren't even my designs. They're from Grace. Judge 3. To Grace. Is this true? Grace. Yes, but I'd never use them for major projects nor call them my own work. I just use sketches of them as inspirations for my own designs. Judge 3. Well, that was clear from your presentation. Turning back to Jane. Now, Miss Jane, this is a clear case of plagiarism, and I do hope your school is merciful on this matter. After the presentation was over, the chairman screamed at the professor in front of everyone, not realizing he just revealed all the blackmailing and the secret grade deal. Jane tried to call out Grace on how you screwed me over, but it really didn't matter. No one listened to Jane's attempt and slander and was kicked out of the school. Chairman pretty much lost all support and had to resign and was replaced by a far more honorable and competent one. Couldn't have gone off better. I find it funny how they were some of the most popular designs, but Jane didn't recognize any of them. And our last story. Subway time theft costs franchise owners much more. About 15 years ago, I was in high school and started working at a new Subway in my town. This was right when the decor changed from a New York City subway map to the vegetables and crap all over the walls. The owners were very adamant that we only got paid for our schedule and not the actual time we worked. I didn't think much of it because I never really had a job before. It was after my first few shifts that I realized this was bullcrap. I'd get paid for working 5 to 8, but I'd have to stay until almost 9 because the dinner rush was rough and the prep needed to get done. After a few pay periods, we high school employees raised the question with the owners and told them our time slips don't match our paychecks. They said we knew that we only got paid for our schedule and not total hours worked. At the time, a buddy was dating a girl whose mom worked for the State Department of Labor. He brought up the issue with his girlfriend's mom and got an investigation started. The problem with the State Labor Department is that investigations were announced ahead of time. They were notified that the state was interested in pay discrepancies and were going to review payroll and compare it to the time clock records, but those gears ground slowly. Before the hammer fell, we had a new policy quickly implemented that said we were only allowed to work the hours we were scheduled and not a minute more. Cool. Glad that's in writing. Things went okay for a few weeks with only occasional managerial grumblings about having to work more now that we left at our time on the dot. Then our city hosted a travel baseball tournament at a park about a mile from our store. You can probably see where this is going. We get busloads of people in our little shopping complex and a line out the door when my shift ends at 1 o'clock. Deuces, guys. The manager/owner's son is in the office watching The Matrix when I go to clock out. He gets all pissy about the line and says I have to stay to help. I ask if I'll get paid for the extra time. He said, "You only get paid for your scheduled time," and trailed off. He knew he was effed. He didn't have the ability to authorize more payroll expenses without also calling his management into question. Sorry. As I'm walking out the front, we weren't allowed to park in the back near the door. We had to park in Gen Pop parking and walk out the front door. He starts following me out and shouting in front of customers. He fired me on the spot and demanded I give back my Subway shirts. No, you took $15 per shirt out of my first paycheck. They're mine. He followed me out into the parking lot, cussing me out in English and Spanish until I drove off. The line was still there when I pulled out. I found out later that afternoon that 2 other people quit after their shifts ended because the job was crap, the pay was crap, and the mother effery was boundless. The absentee owners eventually called each of us and asked us to come back. One of us did. I didn't. My other friend didn't either. I actually got a job at a different Subway that was a piece of cake compared to the job I got fired from. All the employees eventually got their back pay after the Labor Department investigation dust settled. They settled with the state to pay everyone 300% of their missing wages and had to pay for annual audits for 5 years to ensure they weren't breaking the law again. It got so bad that Subway's parent company, Doctors Associates, sent a team down to de-slap the owners into compliance with state and federal labor laws. Glad you got out of that, and very glad your buddy's girlfriend's mom got wind. People who don't buy other people's time fairly can get effed. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.